exist either.
No. That's the problem to begin with, if you like. The godly got here first. They invented religion at a time when we didn't know anything about how the earth went around the sun. We didn't know there were germs. We didn't know the earth wasn't flat. So we're forced, in a sense, to argue on their terms and argue with religion. It oughtn't to be any more necessary to have a word to say there's no God than to say there's no tooth fairy or no Santa Claus. But as it happens, atheism is a necessary demarcation. You either think you're here because of the laws of biology or you think you're here because of a divine plan. I can tell a lot about you from which answer you give to the question.
You say you've been writing this book all your life.
Yeah.
That's presumably...
because it's the oldest argument.
Sure, but also it's an argument that you've cared greatly about. It's quite clear what you say in your book. This has been something that you have felt to be fundamentally wrong since before your voice broke.
Yes, in fact, yeah. Sorry, I nearly squeaked there.
No, well, this is... and
yes, that's right.
This is Mrs. Jean Watts, your teacher. What was it that... I mean, so how old are you, 8 or 9 at the time?
I must have been about 9, and best my recollection will take me. Mrs. Watts was our lovely, sweet old thing, taught us nature walks, different kinds of bracken, gorse. It was in Devonshire, Dartmoor, birds, trees. But she was also our divinity teacher, scripture teacher. And one day she tried too ambitiously to fuse the two things, and she said, look, children, how good God is. He's made all the vegetation green, which is the colour most restful to our eyes. Imagine if he'd made it purple or rhubarb-coloured or orange, how clashing that would be. And I remember thinking, I was 9, I thought, that's nonsense. That must be nonsense. I knew nothing about chlorophyll or photosynthesis or any of these things. I thought, no. Surely the eyes adapt to the surroundings, not the surroundings to the eyes.
Did you put your hand up and...
I didn't say a word. No, I say in the book, I curled my little toes in their tiny ankle-strap sandals with embarrassment for poor Mrs. Watts that she should be so stupid. But no, unlike a lot of people I've since met who realized when they were young that they weren't able to believe the religious account of how we come to be here, just couldn't make themselves believe anything so stupid, that everyone thinks they're the only one at first. It's only when you grow up a bit that you find there are lots of people who can't be doing with it.
What were you brought up to believe, if anything? What was the family tradition?
No, family tradition was not oppressive at all. Both my parents had come from different religions, slightly refugees from them. I think my father had a very strict Baptist upbringing. He wasn't going to inflict on my brother or myself. And my mother was from a Jewish background and wanted to assimilate to become English. And so there was nothing imposed in the home. In case you mean, do I have any resentment about having been pushed around? No, you might. It'd be a perfectly good question. Or other people might be asking themselves. No, I haven't got any resentment of that kind. I used to enjoy my Bible study classes. I didn't even know how to complain that they were compulsory. I just liked them. Taught me a lot.
Because some people arrive at agnosticism or atheism by rejecting a faith that they did have, but it sounds though you pretty much from the
I've been very lucky. I've been very a la carte. I was baptised into the Church of England, neither of my parents having come from it. I think it was basically for them proof that they'd moved up into the middle class. I went to a Methodist boarding school because they thought the education was better. I was married in the Greek Orthodox Church first, and by a rabbi second time round. I could write a book just about varieties of religious. But the Mrs. Watts moment to me, when I think back on it, is not the moment when I became an unbeliever. It was the moment when I realised that I couldn't believe. Different from rejecting a previously held faith. I may have believed the Christmas story at some point, as I would have believed in the Tooth Fairy.
You have a very interesting phrase later on in your book where you describe yourself as a Protestant atheist.
Yes.
And it did set me wondering as to whether someone who arrives at their atheism through a Protestant tradition would be different from someone who arrives at their atheism from a Hindu tradition or a Buddhist tradition or a Catholic tradition. Is there a different type of atheism?
I only know what these guys and girls look like when I meet them. And they all have a different story of how they left their family cult or their tribal religion or their national ethnic one that I couldn't tell for them, but they all come to the same conclusion for the same reasons, that we are not here because of a divine plan. The Big Bang did not take place so that you and I can be having this conversation, that it's absurd and self-centered to think this way, and that the thing is made up by people who want power in the here and now, not in the hereafter. These simple conclusions can occur to anybody. But I don't know what it's like to stop being a Hindu, for example, or to stop being a Muslim, because I cannot imagine what it's like to be one in the first place.
Yes, I'm just intrigued as to the concept of a Protestant atheist.
Well, the Protestant Revolution is, I think, an anteroom for a lot of people to unbelief, because it contains such a strong attack on Holy Mother Church and such a strong attack on priestcraft in its origins. It so much denounces the evils and the ills of religion, and then says, but what you need is a Protestant one, that you're still left with the very strong impression that something important got said in the first round.
You say in your book that you've argued long and hard with religious friends of yours.
Yes.
What do they make of this? Because you're not just saying God doesn't exist, you're kind of saying religious people are stupid, really.
No, not stupid. I'm saying, though, that there is a horrible secret behind the religious impulse. Some people may want it for comfort. Some may want it for transcendence. I don't doubt it. As long as it floats their boat and they leave me alone, I don't mind either. But the wish for there to be a heavenly dictatorship, for there to be a big brother, who's the all-powerful, unalterable dictator of all things for all time, and who can read your thoughts and convict you of thought crimes, strikes me as a horrible one, and I have to distrust anyone who wishes that there was such a regime. And all I can say is that I'm very glad there's no evidence that there is.
So your religious friends, you would, because of that, inherently distrust that section, distrust them?
I can't...
Because they are religious people.
Let's say people always demand respect for their faith. You've noticed this happening. Why should I respect someone who makes enormous claims on no evidence? And when confronted with that fact, says, well, I don't need any evidence, I've got faith. I think extraordinary claims, such as that they know not just that there is a God, but that they know his mind, they know his instructions, they've had revealed truth from him. A claim like that demands extraordinary evidence, instead of which they say, no, how about no evidence at all, and just take me on faith? I said, why am I supposed to respect that? I don't respect it. I suspect it, and I suspect the motives of those who do it, because either they're asking for me to grovel to a skyborn, unalterable dictator, or they're asking for something much cheaper and easier, which is power in the real world, here and now, and riches, collected by the church and enforced by this fear. Well, what's to respect about that? It's just another version of the will to power.
I spent a few hours on Sunday morning with my devotions watching you on various YouTube extracts of you on television, you appearing on American television, you being shouted at by American talk show hosts, and you shouting back at...
yes.
And this argument is a visceral and angry debate right at the heart of everything in the States. Do you get the feeling coming over here that we don't do it like this? It's sort of it's your argument with America, although it's global what you're talking about, but actually this is an American argument particularly.
No, it's true, because in Britain people don't come up to you and say, hey, I'm a Unitarian or a Seventh-day Adventist or something in conversation. They just don't. I mean, they may be that, but they don't flaunt it. In America it's considered quite natural to say this because there's pluralism in religion. It's actually for a good reason, in part, because the state cannot support any one church over another, whereas here we're stuck with the fact that Her Madge is the head of a state church that happens to be withering on the vine, but nonetheless, and that her extraordinary son says he wants to flirt with Islam and be the head of all churches, the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. You couldn't get anything as crazy as that in the United States, but what you do get instead is 3 candidates for the Republican nomination for the presidency saying they don't believe in evolution, or evolution as we say here. And then when asked what they mean by that, stating that they don't know what the theory of evolution is, or proving by their comments that they don't know what it is. In other words, they don't know even what they disbelieve in. Now that's alarming. And so when I meet talk show hosts in America who are like that, I don't wait for them to shout at me. I shout at them first.
In your assessment, are all religions equally dangerous?
Latently, yes, they are. I mean, my daughter goes to a Quaker school in Washington, as it happens, and I don't say that the Society of Friends is the same as the Mahdi Army, but I do say that they all make the same mistake, which is to surrender reason and surrender evidence and say, well, why not let's believe things without evidence, and not just a few things, but the most important things, such as why are we here, what are we here for, how do we come to be here. They say, no, we don't want to analyse any of that or reason about it, let's just refer that upward and sink to our knees. They all make that mistake. They're all equal glimpses of the same untruth in that respect.
Would you accept that there are many religious...
And the sleep of reason brings forth monsters. Sorry.
Thank you. No, it's good.
You might like that coda there.
Would you accept that there are many religious people who do great work and have done, through their work with the poor, through their work for equality, for the abolition of slavery, for their work with trade justice, those kind of issues, and they do it
well,
because...
they better have done something about slavery since Christianity imposed it for so long and upheld it for so long. It was a high time for a few Christians to say they thought it was a bad idea. Why they had needed to add that they did it because they were Christian, I don't know. You're thinking Mr. Wilberforce, I suppose.
Well, I'm thinking...
others too, but I mean, Thomas Paine and
Martin Luther King.
Thomas Paine and the others who founded the American Anti-Slavery Society were all non-believers. But that doesn't do any credit to non-belief either, because you could be an atheist and pro-slavery, of course. Here's my wager or my challenge. It's this. I'll ask your listeners. Maybe someone wants to call in. You have to name an ethical statement made or a moral action done by a believer, a religious believer, that couldn't have been made by, or hasn't been done by, but basically couldn't be made by a non-believer. No one can find such an instance. But, so I can name you dozens of heroic German Stalinists who fought very bravely against Hitler.
My point
but it doesn't go to their communism, does it? It doesn't vindicate their communism.
Do you think that there are horrific acts then, as an opposite to that, which have been carried out by religious people which could not have been carried out?
Yeah, whereas, yes, if I ask any audience, and I've tried this too, can you think of something absolutely wicked that was done by a religious person because they were a believer? Well, nobody has any difficulty in thinking of...
That's not exactly the same question, though, is it? Is there a particularly horrific act which couldn't have been done by a non-believer?
That couldn't, no, it doesn't work precisely. As a corollary, you're quite right, but or not until I've worked on it a bit more, it won't. But if I say to people just the ordinary question, can you think of a wicked thing that a believer has done that you wouldn't have done yourself? Mutilate the genitals of a child, blow yourself up in the hope of paradise, taking other people with you. Things of that kind, preaching hellfire to children, terrifying children, a very wicked thing to do. Lying to children, another wicked thing to do, that you a morally normal person just wouldn't do. Nobody has any difficulty thinking of a crime committed for religious motives.
Is it not true that politicians, scientists, religious people are all capable of goodness and all capable of wickedness? Robert Service...
Of course.
Yes. We were talking about the history of communism last week. Robert Service was on with his world history of communism. He's estimated that deaths from Stalin, Mao and others, if I remember right, it's around 120 million plus. Great wickedness carried out in the name of, well, Stalinism, socialism, atheism. That doesn't necessarily...
Not in the name of atheism, as a matter of fact, but I mean, I have a chapter in my book entirely devoted to this argument, very briefly. In Russia in 1917, millions of Russians have been ordered to believe for hundreds of years that the head of the government of Russia should be a holy king. The Tsar was the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, remember, as well as an absolute despot. Millions of Russians lied to, made to believe this servile nonsense. But if you're Joseph Stalin, who's educated in a seminary to be a priest, you're missing a chance if you can't exploit a great reservoir of credulity and servility like that. It's been ready-made for you down the ages by feudalism and by the church. Lo and behold, he produces miracles, Lysenko's biology and agriculture. He produces a witch hunt. He produces an inquisition. He produces mass adulation of the leader, for whom all thanks are due. He replicates the entire thing. to have a quarrel with my worldview, you'd have to show that it was a society that followed the precepts of Lucretius and Spinoza and Voltaire and Jefferson and Einstein and Bertrand Russell, and show that a society had fallen into famine and terror and misery and torture and dictatorship for that reason. That would be a fair comparison. But the others, the ones you mention, are surrogate forms of religion that are built on the ruins of the collapse of faith-based worshipful societies. The thing is to give up faith and worship in the first place.
So are you saying that when a wickedness is carried out by someone because of their religion, it's that religion's fault, but when the wickedness is carried out by an atheist, it has nothing to do with their atheism?
No, I wouldn't say that, and didn't say that. But I say that people are asked often, are offered often by religion the right to give up personal responsibility. In other words, to cast their sins onto somebody else, to have a scapegoat whereby all sins are forgiven and you're washed white as snow, to give up the idea of individual responsibility. I don't think atheism equals that in immorality, but an atheist can be just as immoral as a religious person.
And what about when there are numerous stories in the United States, but and over here as well, when terrible things happen to a family? I was thinking of the Walker family. I don't know if this made news in the United States. Is last year, Anthony Walker was black. He was escorting his white girlfriend to a bus stop, and he was murdered. His mother, G. Walker, who's a Christian, said, "My family and I stand by what we believe, which is forgiveness, and I forgive their murderers." Now, surely the world is a better place for people like that.
Absolutely not. The murderers should have been arrested. And
absolutely, but the world is a better place for people like G. Walker.
Subjected to the strongest penalty the law possibly allows. No, it's wrong to love your enemies. It's absolutely immoral to love them, let alone to forgive them. It's not her right to do that. I'm sorry. She may be one of the interested parties. It's in the general interest of society that people like that not be forgiven. The interest we have is in justice, not in love or forgiveness. It's positively immoral. The next thing she'll say is we should love the Taliban or we should love Al-Qaeda because they're our enemies. I'm not letting her do that. I don't even think she should be loving her own enemies. I'm not going to have a loving mind. No, it's very important. This stuff is immoral. It says that there is relatively no difference between a wicked person who does whatever they like and a person who abides by the law and respects their fellow creatures. It's an absolutely repulsive doctrine.
My understanding, and I obviously can't speak for her, is that she wasn't saying, I don't want justice for my son. What she was saying was, for me, personally, I forgive that act. But
then it's just an empty gesture, probably designed only to gratify her. I'd like to know what the person concerned, the actual victim, would have said in this case. No, that just seems to me to be moral grandstanding of a very low kind.
Christopher Hitchens is here. God is not great. A raft of emails, if that's the appropriate collective noun. Just one thing I wanted to mention specifically. When you came in at 2 o'clock, people might have heard a laugh off microphone when the Salman Rushdie knighthood story came up. Just be interested in your views on that. Did he deserve a knighthood?
Well, I'm a Republican myself, and not that I'm ever likely to be offered a gong of any sort, would decline. I think it would have been churlish for Salman to decline once offered, because, after all, the British government did protect him when he was in trouble, and though sometimes with a slightly ill grace, it did do so. And now he's attracted the right kind of enemy for saying yes. So I feel a bit more solid about Sir Salman than I did a couple of days ago.
Was that...
What the hell business is it of these characters to pronounce on who we decide to honour with a knighthood? It's absolutely none of their business at all. And if they say it insults all Muslims, then they're in a weak position to keep on saying, don't judge us by the extremists.
Was that the arguments and violence and the fatwa which was issued against Salman Rushdie, was that, do you think, in popular culture terms, the beginning of this debate that we're having now about Islamism?
Well, it was an early warning, certainly to me, of what might be coming. In other words, it was a huge intervention in our internal affairs by the theocratic dictator of a foreign state, a British subject, for the crime of writing a novel. And that's a very radical, deep intervention into our internal affairs. And I remember thinking, well, you can't do that, but we might have to intervene in yours if it goes on like this. At the time, though, the Muslim protesters burned him in effigy. Some of them said he should be burned in real life and so forth. But they were saying because he's a Muslim apostate, because he's one of ours and he's strayed from the flock, that is mandated by the hadith of the Islamic canon. Increasingly since, they've said anyone who criticizes Islam, whether they're a Muslim or not, should be beheaded. You've seen demonstrations in London saying that, which is an extraordinary crossing of a line. And backed not just by burnings in effigy, but by bombings and by threats of further violence. This is very, very serious. And the Pakistani, well, calling it a parliament is a bit much. There isn't such a thing as a parliament in Pakistan. There's a puppet rubber stamp assembly. But nonetheless, these people keep on saying, when you criticize them, don't judge us by the extremists. And here they all are, unanimously it seems, saying the extremists speak for us. Well, let them make up their minds and let us make up ours.
One of the Hitchens speeches, which is available to those who want to watch it online, is the speech that you made outside the Danish embassy, the middle of the cartoon row, which you finished by saying solidarity with Denmark, death to fascism.
Yes.
Is this how you view Islamism?
The old slogans are the best, I always think.
Yes. But is that you think that this Islamic threat or Islamism or extreme Islam, whatever you want to call it, is akin to fascism? Yes,
I do. It's based on an anti-Semitic paranoid conspiracy theory of the world economy and of world history. It has a love for violence. It's a cult of death. It exalts the idea of a future empire, which will be run by a super, not race exactly, but a super team, partly ethnic, partly religious, those who are destined to rule the world. And it's just entirely destructive to and oppressive of its own people. And when you see what it does to them in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere, you can imagine what it would do to non-Muslims. It's the only real comparison is, yes, with the fascistic form of totalitarianism. And it has to be fought with the same energy and determination.
Some listeners' comments in just now. If you put some headphones on, Christopher,
oh, sure.
You'll be disappointed if you didn't have a minister of religion to argue with. And we have Tim in Blandford Forum. Hello, Tim.
Good afternoon, Simon.
Are you the Reverend Tim?
I am indeed.
Yes, sir. Christopher Hitchens is listening.
Well, I found it very interesting. I mean, I first of all must be one of his characters that he loathes, because I'm obviously out for power in my local church. First of all, I find it amazing the number of generalizations he uses to come to this one conclusion, that God obviously doesn't exist and people like me are deluded, and I am in turn deluding hundreds of people.
Which are the generalizations you're thinking of?
Well, the fact that there's no evidence, or his comment that there is no evidence, I would have thought the most important evidence of all is the fact that after thousands of years, religions, not just my own, but other religions, are still in existence, still happening, and still growing. And yes, there are good and bad elements to all of it, but the fact is there are still billions of people who believe.
OK, Tim, you keep going on that. I'll get Christopher in just a moment. What else did you want to add?
Well, there's the simple thing that if I am deluded and I'm deluding other people, what is the energy, the power that causes that? Because I personally don't think I'm a bright enough person to delude that number of people. I think that
could well be right.
More.
That could well be right.
Well, that's very kind of you.
But trying is still just as bad.
So the fact that I try,
and I suppose I hope you're willing to accept this on behalf of everybody else who believes that the Aztecs are the followers of Louis Farrakhan's nation of Islam, David Koresh, the Mormons. This is the survival of cults like this is evidence for your side, is it? Because if so, as it seems to be, well, then you better not take it a la carte, Reverend. If you're going to claim it for your team, you have to claim it for them all, and you're welcome. You stay with that team, I'll stay with mine.
Tim?
Except that most of those cults that he mentions are cults which have either died out or have been, they are shown to be people who are deluded in perhaps, how shall I put it, some way that is not appropriate.
Oh, so you're saying that the fastest growing Christian church in America is deluding itself, are you? The Mormons? Well, I'm glad to see you can see it in some cases. One day you'll get to see it in your own.
But you're saying that the churches are dying. You described the Church of England as, I can't remember.
Well, the Church of England is famously moribund. I mean, it's losing membership and property and influence all the time. There's not a member of it who doesn't worry about this publicly. But I don't say the religion is dying. To the contrary, I point to the extraordinary danger of the recrudescence of primitive superstition all around the world.
Tim?
You take that as the evidence for the existence of God.
I take evidence for the...
Give yourself a break.
I take evidence for the existence of God with the fact that I see people's lives changing around me, that I am not, in fact, one of those. I'm probably unique in your eyes as somebody who doesn't see the Church of England is dying, because around me I see hundreds, even thousands of people in churches which are growing, which are exciting, where young people are involved.
You'll admit that's not the general impression of the Anglican Communion.
Well, there's a thing about impression, and there's a thing about...
No, you will
reality.
admit that the Anglican Communion does not go around saying, join us with the fastest growing church in Blandford Forum. It's usually allowed that it's admitted. I just saw the Archbishop in Washington last Sunday. It's admitted that there's a grave crisis in the church of allegiance, of influence, of morale, and now of schismatic tendencies, owing to the church's own stupid teachings on homosexuality.
Tim, I'll give you...
Maybe it's different in your part of the country.
There are many more emails I want to get to. Tim, I'll just give you the final word.
Well, all I'd simply say is that he's very entitled, obviously, to his perceptions, but his perceptions...
Oh, thank you.
Yes, well, and so am I entitled to mine, which is that I believe...
Who would say you weren't? You have a benefice. We have to pay taxes for you to have your job.
You don't pay taxes for my job.
Excuse me, are you not a member of an established church?
Tim, thanks very much for calling.
Thank you.
We could debate this along. I just have a whole number of emails which I want to get through from listeners to Chris.
Sheep-faced loon.
I'm sorry?
I'm just talking to myself.
Right. Claire in Holywell, it's refreshing to hear Christopher on the radio being brave and speaking for what I believe to be the views of the majority in this country. Do you think you're speaking for the majority?
No. I don't. I mean, I think there are a majority of people who are sceptical or dubious. I don't think there are a majority of people who are convinced atheists. No.
She says, why are we not a genuine secular society yet? Do you think there are some...
Well, because we have a queen who's the head of the state, head of the church, head of the armed forces.
Do you think there are some atheists who would have assumed that by now we would have, as you see it, sort of lost the trappings of faith?
Well, they wouldn't have included me, because I've always believed that Freud was right in his brilliant essay, The Future of an Illusion, that until we get over the idea of death, which I think is very improbable, unlikely, we're not going to be immune to offers as made from Blandford Forum and other joints, that if we make the right obeisances, sprinkle the right water, so forth, make the right propitiations, an exception we made in our case. It's a wicked thing to be offering, but there will be takers for such a fraudulent scheme.
A couple of interesting notes here. This from Sarah. While I agree with Christopher's analysis of the absurd nature of religious faith, it seems to me that religion serves a very useful social function for which we seem to have no adequate replacement. Formal religious faith provides an effective, off-the-shelf set of values and standards of behaviour which, as we're now learning to our cost, are not easily achieved through secular means without an awful lot of very intrusive legislation and social control. Crazy as religion is, says Sarah, I'd rather live in a society whose values are based on popular religious belief than in an authoritarian one where values are compelled by the state.
Which popular religious belief, I wonder, does she mean? I mean, and is she willing to take them all, or is she going to take them a la carte? Does she mean genital mutilation of children?
I suspect.
Does she mean
not.
the belief that water can be made to turn into wine, or wine into blood, or bread into flesh? Disgusting human sacrifice.
Maybe do unto others as they would have
kind.
you done to you, and.
Well, that is a secular statement. That's a secular statement. She could have, in all the verbiage she just used, have taken up my challenge. Find me a moral statement made by a religious person or action performed by one that couldn't be performed by a non-believer. And then name me a wicked thing done by someone that was only done because of their faith. Everyone can do the latter. No one can do the former. I rest my case. What is it? Half an hour since I issued the challenge. I'm not going to tell you what the prize is.
This is like what would have been more exciting, I think, is if, like the amazing Randy, who you also mentioned.
Yes.
I think it's $100,000 for anyone who can bend his bit of
it's $3 million can do. He'll give them $3 million. I'm one of his underwriters.
Paul in
no takers, by the way.
Absolutely none.
None.
Okay, you think your money's
he
safe?
smashed Uri Geller on the telly in that way.
How much do you stand to lose if someone does it?
Well, I put in my house. I put in my mortgage.
That'll be a lot then.
Yeah, I'm not going. I feel perfectly confident in it.
Paul in Mid-Glamorgan.
There are no miracles.
Simon, yet another atheist obsessed with evidence. Evidence is a concept that belongs to science. Religion is not science. Do I need evidence to judge the Good Samaritan's action? Do I need evidence to believe that loving my neighbour is a good thing? And neither should evidence be set in opposition to faith. Again, do I need blind faith to acknowledge the spiritual power behind Christ's "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do"? And then he, as a final question, has your guest read Wittgenstein? But that to one side for the moment.
In reverse order, yes, I have. In the second order, you wouldn't need evidence to appreciate the gesture made by the Good Samaritan of one human being to another in trouble. I mean, evidence doesn't come into that. You might, if you wanted to prove there had ever been such a person at that time in that part of Samaria, you'd need evidence, but it seems to me to be overburdening the story. What you cannot say is that he was motivated by religion to help his fellow man, because the story is told by Jesus. He clearly can't therefore have been a Christian, the Samaritan. As far as we know, he did the right thing for no other reason than that it was the right thing. In the same way, I'd ask in return, do my Jewish ancestors have to be accused of having got all the way to Mount Sinai? Not that that story is true either, but suppose it was. Under the impression that murder and perjury and theft were okay, only to discover when they get to Sinai, here are some commandments that say they're not kosher? Of course not. It's an insult to humanity to talk like this. They wouldn't have got that far if they'd thought that murder and theft and perjury were all right.
We've talked all this time, we haven't even mentioned Iraq, so maybe this will be one of the interviews that just doesn't get into that. Do you think, finally, Christopher, that if... I had a similar conversation with Richard Dawkins, but do you think that you would win more converts to atheism if you were less dismissive of religious people?
I have no idea, but I can't be other than dismissive. I hear someone like that sheep-faced loon from Blandford Forum. I have to say it sounds like bleating to me, and I remember why you people call yourselves a flock. Yeah, be like a sheep if you must, but please leave me out of it. I'm not a sheep, and I don't need a shepherd, and what shepherds do when they're not actually messing around with their sheep is they're keeping them alive so they can be fleeced and then killed. And yes, hearing these bleatings from the Church of England does remind me of that. I don't feel any need to make converts by not saying what I think. I leave it to them to make their hypocritical, unctuous, pseudo-friendly statements in the hope of keeping people inside the church.
Finally, just because it was in the news today, should RE be taught in schools? There was an Ofsted report saying that it says it's issued this report about the role of RE in the national curriculum. It says that RE must be provided for all registered pupils with an agreed syllabus that should, and I quote, reflect the fact that the religious traditions in Great Britain are in the main Christian, whilst taking account of the teachings and practices of other principal religions.
No, not for that reason. No, that's ridiculous, because that also opens the door, and has already opened the door with the help of the Church of England, to the forcible inculcation of the Quran, and also to separate schools for separate denominations of Christianity, the brilliant solution that worked so wonderfully in Ulster for so long. No, that's just an incitement to sectarianism and superstition. No, I don't think a person has been educated until they have studied the King James Bible and the Cranmer Prayer Book. I'm just talking about England now, and English literature and the English tradition. I couldn't count as educated someone who didn't have a pretty good working knowledge of the King James and Cranmer versions of some of the English hymnals. Of course, the Church of England has tossed those out in favour of New Age Babel books, so my point would now be, in spite of... we'd have to teach it in spite of Christianity, or in spite of established Christianity, not because of it. But yes, I think everyone should be... it must be studied. Yes, but it must not be taught as if it were revealed truth, because... Well, actually it can't be, because anyone who studies it will see that no such revelation could have been so incoherent and so inconsistent. But when you read in the book of Job that man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward, if you don't respond to a thing like that, or to the psalmist, or to some of the 39 articles even in the appendices of the prayer book, then you have no feeling for English literature, which is a great national problem as it is. And you wouldn't be able to understand a lot of Shakespeare. You couldn't read Milton at all. You probably wouldn't get the devotional poetry of George Herbert and John Donne. I think it's absolutely essential. It's part of the canonical education in our language and literature. But to teach it for the banal ghastly bureaucratic motives that you just read out would be to make everything boring for everybody.
Christopher Hitchens, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
No, it's very handsome of you to have me.